Hola, hola. Hi, how are you all doing? As you read or as you can see on my topic, this live video is for people who wanna learn English. I could also teach Spanish. I studied English when I came to the United States back in 2016, and I began to learn the language, and I learned a lot about the language, and now I can speak both languages, English and Spanish. I also did a research about how do adults acquire a second language. So I kind of have a knowledge based on my own experience and on the research I did about how people learn a second language. So I'm gonna share with you my research. There are many reasons for which a person would wanna learn a second language. It could be travel because of they need it for their career, because of pressure, because they want to learn about a different culture, because they want to be able to speak and communicate with people their in their target language. In my case, for example, it was English. It was my goal to be able to communicate in English because I live in the United States. So I decided that it was an important task for me to achieve. So I decided to enroll in an ESL class. And then from there, when I got a good grasp of the language, I was able to enroll in college. And when I was in college is when I decided to do a research about, because it was part of my English composition class, to find out about a topic and present an essay about that topic. So I decided to do the research about how do adults acquire a second language, because that's how I basically did that, but I didn't have any research based information. It was just my own experience, me producing on the internet ways to acquire that second language. So, one of the things that people believe is that because depending on your age, you are not going to be able to learn a language. And that's a myth, because based on my research or what I found, what that other people who did research on this topic found is that there is a critical period in which people are more easily able to learn a language, and that period is when you are a child, because your brain is absorbing everything. So you have this ability to, based on your environment, absorb what is being presented to you. So that's one of the myths that people have, that because when you grow older you cannot learn a language because you are not that young and you don't have the same capabilities to learn the language. But that's a myth, because based on this research it says that, so if you are able to learn a language when you are younger because of how the environment around you is, why are you not going to be able to do it when you grow older? So, but the only difference is the method in which you acquire the language. So, when you are older, you learn different things. You need to first be in the environment. That's one thing that I found out in this research, is that based on my research, if you are in the environment in which you need to, in which you are supposed to speak the language that you are trying to learn, you are gonna need to learn the grammar. You are gonna have to have input, and input is very important, because the more you hear the language, the more you are going to begin to understand it. And there are different ways in which you can understand a language. Mm, so people have tested the grammatical skills of the learners of the second language. Um, Depending on which material you use to learn the language, that's how your level of acquisition will improve. For example, people who study informational material, they are gonna be able to absorb information in a different way. They are gonna be able to communicate better because of that. There was one person who also, based on this research, I found out that this one person tried to learn a second language, not English necessarily. She tries to learn, she tried to learn German, I think at first, but it was really difficult for her, and it was not the lack of her ability to learn the language; it was her motivation to learn the language, and that the conditions she needed to learn the language were not there. Like I told you, input is important in the environment in which you are. Also, it's important for you to acquire the second language, because if you are in an environment in which you see the language all the times and you hear it at all times, you are gonna be able to have it in your mind, and that's one thing. To be able to speak the language, you need to have it in you. You need to absorb the language and put it in your brain and be able to make sense out of it, and begin to speak and talk to other people based on the knowledge that you have for the language. So input in the environment in which you are is important because of that. So that was one of the things that didn't help this person to learn German when she was trying to learn it. But then she tried to learn another language, still being this her second language, because she failed to learn German. So that language that she tried to learn later was French, and for her to learn French, she had to go to a country of to go to France, a French speaking country. So she moved over there, and when her experience over there was different because she was motivated. She was in the environment and she had a motivation to learn the language. So she was there, and uh, she had people around her who would talk to her every day, because the place where she was living, she was staying with people who spoke French. So this person was able to communicate, or to communicate the language that she was learning, as much as she could with these people that were native speakers. So the environment, like I told you, is important. The environment in which you are, and the more you see the language, the more easy it is gonna be for you to learn to grasp the language. So this is one experience that I found out that is important for the second language acquisition as an adult. And another thing that I personally learned, that it is not my research, but that I personally can share with you, is that, for example, some people will, if you are living in that country that you are trying to learn the language of, you're gonna have to talk to people in their native language. In my case, it was English, and so these people, sometimes they are not gonna be able to understand, because depending on your level of fluency, that's how your pronunciation is gonna be. And sometimes at first it is not gonna be the right pronunciation, because the sounds of the English language are different from the language I speak natively. So it is similar, but in some way it is different. So you are gonna have to learn the phonics, the way that native people speak. But for that, you need to practice and you need to communicate. And the more you communicate, the more you are gonna be able to make the sounds that native people make. And so, for them to understand you, you are gonna have to put a lot of effort in practicing the language through speaking, through output. That's what it is called, output. So, and one important part of the output is that you are going to have to learn the right pronunciation. You're going to have to get a lot of input and through learning the phonics for you to be able to speak properly and people understand. One way for people to learn a language is peer to peer. So if you are in a classroom and you obviously you if you wanna learn it through classroom, because there are different ways in which you can get input. But one way that I decided to do it was through attending a classroom, to attending to an USA classroom. So people there are gonna use different type of sources to learn the language. It could be films, comedy, cartoons, and news. And these materials are gonna have a different way of presenting a language to you. So people speak different, and depending on the audience you are talking to, or for example, if it is a comedy, they are gonna talk in a very native way, and they are gonna talk in a very humorous way. And if you notice, people who are humorous, they have a way of talking, and you might be not able to understand it. So that's why people choose to study through informational materials, because that's a language that is more formal, but it's the language that's a standard to people, or at least in an academic setting. So, but if you wanna talk to people on an everyday basis, probably films, comedy, and cartoons are gonna be for you. But if you are gonna have to do academic stuff, you are gonna have to learn through media or the news, because that's a more formal language and that's a more proper way of communication. So those are kind of audiovisual technology that you can use to learn the language. And based on this research, people who had a lower level of language or language acquisition were the people who were actually studying or were actually using the materials of cartoons, films, and comedy. Probably one of the reasons for that is that they didn't have people to explain to them, probably. And I didn't find out on this research, but that was one of the outputs that the researcher found for people who were learning the language through these materials. So again, the environment in which you are is important for you to acquire the language. And another thing that is important is the way you acquire the language. For example, the way you acquire the language in which, for example, if you are presented a concept and then if a word is said to you and you don't have an image associated to that word, or you haven't lived a situation in which you can recognize that word, you are not gonna be able to understand what people are saying, if you get me. For example, if I say to you a rock and you have never heard that word before, and if you haven't seen a rock and people saying that word rock, it is not gonna come to your mind what that person is saying. And that is something that's important. That you need to associate an image to a word that you are learning. And you need to learn concepts too. You need to have background information of the word that you are learning. If you do not have the image of the word that you are learning, you might be able to learn it through a concept, for example. but that's an advanced level of that language acquisition. And so that's the research I did about learning a second language. So I think that's a very useful research because this information is what I found out based on my own experience, and that's how I learned the language. So I think it works if you want to learn another language. But like I told you, one of the background information that is important to remember is that the input you have is important. And one way to get input is to move to the country in which you are going to learn the language. But if you don't have that, there is these resources that you can use: films, cartoons, news, comedy, all audio visual technology that you can find to access this language. It's gonna be useful for you to acquire that language. So, and that's the research I did about how do adults acquire a second language. It's not that we are not capable when we are adults. It's just that we need to be conscious and put the effort to learn the language. That's what I learned from doing this research in my own experience. And we need to pray a lot too. You need to have a lot of discipline, motivation, and determination. You need to be consistent to learn the language. I used to go they had 4 days of ESL classes, and I would go every day. Every single day I could go, I would be there hearing the language, trying to absorb what they were teaching me. And also when I got home and if I went to the store, I would try to practice what I learned so that language will stick to me. And that was, as you can hear, it worked. My pronunciation still needs to get better. I don't have a native accent, but I think it is good. So, and I was thinking about that. I was thinking because I have a website where you can find services. If you need help with something that you need translation from English to Spanish or Spanish to English, I can help you with that. You just need to reach out to me through my website, send me an email, or fill out a form, and I will help you with that, whatever you need. So that's one way you can reach out to me if you need help with translating documents or anything related to English and Spanish language. So yes, and I was thinking about because I have the books. I have the books we use in the ESL classroom. And I got the grammar books of English. So I was thinking about helping people to learn the language. Because I have the material and I think I'm able to do that. I have a degree in business technology. It's not a degree in English, but for me to get into college and get my degree of business technology, I had to learn English.